Hi, everyone. Suzanne Etkin back again for part two of the neighborhood source assessment. So now that we have made all of our observations about our community, we're going to talk about how do we translate observations into rainscaping suggestions. So when we looked at the yards and lawns, if you were seeing some trends in some of these problems, highly managed turf, extensive turf cover, you might want to think maybe I should address either how that turf is being managed or maybe replacing some of that turf with trees or planted areas. If you see low forest canopy, maybe a tree planting program might be something that you might want to do in your community. Bare soil, you might want to think about erosion repair, better turf cover, or replacing some of that bare soil with native plants like they did in the Cedar Ridge community. If there's lots of septic systems in your community, maybe focusing on septic care or septic pump out might be something that you would consider in your community. The same goes with your observations of driveways. If you have a lot of driveways that are, crumbling or stained, you might want to address, the sources of those stains. Maybe it's a lot of cars that are leaking oil or cars that are not are parked, in areas for long amounts of time. If there's driveways that are crumbling, maybe there's an opportunity to when people resurface their driveways to replace them with a pervious driveway. If you're seeing sidewalks in bad condition, maybe when those sidewalks are repaired, they can be, repaired with a pervious sidewalk. Or maybe there's an opportunity for some street trees in your community. For rooftops, again, if you've got a lot of your downspouts that are going to hard surfaces or the street, you want to maybe consider rain barrels, or maybe you consider connecting your downspouts to rain gardens or other pervious area. We call that downspout redirection. So if that's a trend in your community, you might think, maybe I want to do a downspout redirection or a rain barrel program in my community. In your common areas, if you're seeing a whole lot of pet waste that's not picked up, maybe you do a pet waste program. If you've got a big stormwater pond, maybe you want to consider whether that pond could be, how well is it maintained? Does it need maintenance? Could it be a candidate for a retrofit, which we'll actually talk about later in the course. If there's a lot of turf cover that's not used for anything, maybe you want to do a tree planting in that area. If you've got a lot of storm drain inlets in your community, maybe you want to do an adopt a storm drain or a storm drain stenciling program. If you are seeing a lot of trash around, maybe there's dumping, or maybe the trash or even recycling is escaping from people's recycling bins or trash cans on trash day. So these are just ideas of, if you see a problem, here might be some of the solution or a solution. Now, it might be overwhelming that in 3 minutes I've gone through 17 stewardship techniques, but again, this is just an introduction, and as we go through the course, you'll become more and more comfortable with making observations and thinking, oh, what could I do instead? So now we're going to talk about pollution sources. So pollution sources are often lumped into groups. So nutrients are a big source of pollution, or bacteria. So I'm going to go through some common observations that are made in communities and talk about what pollution source they might indicate. So the first one, fertilizer, leaves in the storm drain inlet, and a lot of people that are washing their cars on the sidewalk. That might lead you to believe that there's a lot of nutrient pollution coming from your community, and sort of reducing the sources of nutrients might be something that you focus on. If you've got a lot of poorly maintained septic systems, a lot of pet waste, or even urban wildlife like golf course geese in your community, or you know, a lot of boats with boat discharge. That might be an indication of high bacteria. And we're going to talk a little more about bacteria later in the course. Then lastly, if you've got a lot of bare spots in your soil, if you're seeing dirt on your sidewalks or dirt in your curbs, if you've got a lot of driveway deterioration, that might be a sediment issue in your community. So next, if you've got dumping, if you've got trash, if you see poor dumpster or trash can management, like dumpsters that are left open, or even recycling containers that don't have lids on them, that's probably indicating trash as your pollution source. Poor vehicle maintenance, oil and grease on the road. If you've got, and you won't know this by observation in your assessment, but you might know it by talking to community members. If people have a lot of old paint cans or old cleaning chemicals, they might be tempted to throw those away in the trash, and we know that those need to be disposed of with hazardous waste. And then, so that might be an indication of oil or hazardous waste toxins. And then lastly, if you've got a lot of your downspouts that are going to impervious or hard surfaces, if you have a lot of hard surfaces that are not treated with, you know, some sort of a stormwater management, you might have excessive runoff volume in your community. So those are some different pollution sources that come from different practices in our communities. So the last thing we're going to talk about with the neighborhood source assessment is taking all of your observations and making recommendations. So part F is your recommendations section. Your recommendations section is going to lead you to, all right, what are the one or two pollution sources that I might want to help my community address through a behavior change that might be a candidate for a habit that I might want to help my community change. What are the one or two rainscaping actions that might be applicable to most of my community? Again, so that you can be talking about one or two practices and not giving your community the menu of 17 different things that they can do, because that we know that that's overwhelming for people. So pollution severity, is there a part of your community that's more polluted than another, or a part of your community that has a higher opportunity for restoration? And maybe that's an area that you want to start in. Sometimes it's not necessary to start in your entire community. And then lastly, are there parts of your community property that might represent an opportunity for a project? So again, you're going to pay some special attention to the circles and the diamonds. The form actually asks you to add up all your circles and all your diamonds. So you'll go ahead and do that. And when you add up your circles and your diamonds, if you have more than 10 circles that you've colored in, you know that's a part of your community that's pretty severely polluted. If you have 5 or fewer, it's maybe a more moderate area. And the same thing goes with your restoration index. So you just add those up and you can sort of begin to tell, you know, how your community compares. And this is an example of a community where they've just shaded in the different areas of the community that are more or less polluted. And so if I were in this community and I were wanting to work in one section, I might pick, you know, maybe section 7 or 6 or 11E as areas that I might start rather than starting in the entire community. So that's all helping you to sort of make a plan as a steward in the community. What rainscaping practices are you going to promote? What habits are you going to promote? So here's the section F on the form. And we just went through, you know, what circles might indicate nutrients, which might indicate oil and grease, trash and litter, etc. So you want to add up all the circles that might relate to a nutrient source, and you put the number, all that add up to the oil and grease, trash and litter, bacteria, sediment, toxins, etc. And whichever one has the most, that might be the big winner. You know, if you've got a whole lot of bacteria sources, maybe you want to do some project in your community that helps reduce bacteria. If sediment is the one where you have the most, you might want to do a project that helps reduce sediment in your community. And in your community, you are going to focus on either a habit or a practice. So the pollution reducing behavior changes or your rainscaping. And for the purposes of your observations here, you're going to pick one or two as part of this form. You know, what are the one or two behavior changes that you might want to focus on? So if you know that you've got a lot of people who heavily fertilize their lawn, maybe you want to check lawn care. If you've got a lot of pet waste in your community, a lot of people with dogs and you're observing pet waste, or you suspect that there could be a lot of pet waste in people's backyards, maybe you check that one. And the same thing with rainscaping. You know, if you've got a lot of people if you've got a lot of area with no trees, maybe you want to pick canopy trees. If you've got a lot of downspouts connected directly to the storm drain system or hard surface, maybe you want to do downspout disconnection. So you're just going to check a couple of ideas, and this helps you focus your capstone project. You can fill in the severity of your neighborhood or the section of your neighborhood, and you can begin to check any opportunities that you see for community area. So for your capstone project, your challenge is to pick one thing in your community that you're going to help educate people on, raise their awareness on, and you're going to demonstrate that practice through your capstone project. And whether you're doing an environmental literacy capstone project or in the ground project, this process helps you to focus. You might think living shorelines are, you know, the thing that you want to raise awareness about. But when you observe your community, there's only one property or two properties that could be candidates for living shorelines. So you don't want to necessarily focus on something that is only applicable to, you know, one or two places in your community. You really want to raise awareness about something that a lot of your community can engage in. So your capstone proposal part 1 is due on February 16th. This is your neighborhood, your environmental assessment and your social assessment. So the NSA helps you to fill out your neighborhood or your environmental assessment. So it will help you get the answers to the questions in part of part 1. So you're not going to turn in your NSA worksheet. You're going to just use the worksheet and the observations to answer the questions that are in your environmental assessment. You know, what are the good things about your community environmentally? What pollution sources did you discover? What are the rainscaping opportunities? What are the opportunities to change behaviors? Are there opportunities on community property? So you're going to utilize your worksheet to help you answer these questions. And we're actually going to send you out in your community. You can go out anytime between now and the beginning of February and do your neighborhood source assessment. And we're going to give you guys an opportunity to talk about what you observed at the beginning of February during one of the Learning Pod discussions. So that'll give you a little bit of time to discuss your observations before you have to turn in your homework on February 16th. So exceptions to the rule. If you are doing a project on a school or a library or a congregation or a business, the neighborhood source assessment can be useful in understanding, you know, what the surrounding community is. We still encourage you to do a neighborhood source assessment just to practice it, but you may find that the environmental assessment part of your capstone proposal, you might have a better observation using the site assessment or the residential site assessment. We're not going to teach that until later in the course, So if that's the case for you, you may just delay filling in your environmental assessment until after we teach that site assessment later in the course. So in general, with the neighborhood source assessment, if a lot of your neighborhood is looking like this, you're going to say to yourself, all right, how could I help my neighborhood to improve their pollution coming from this lawn? You know, there's a little yellow flag. Maybe this lawn is using pesticides or herbicides. It's a big green lawn. Maybe it's an opportunity for trees or for rainscaping. So you want to look at practices that are appropriate for many different properties on your in your neighborhood.